I rented the house for a weekend to finish a work project without distractions. I wanted quiet and isolation, a place where time could narrow down to tasks and deadlines. The listing photos were sparse. White walls, old hardwood floors, a kitchen with empty counters, no framed photos, no magnets on the refrigerator. The owner said he lived out of town now. The wording felt deliberate, but not strange enough to question. The house sat on a residential street with mature trees and sidewalks that had cracked into uneven squares. Neighboring homes showed signs of long occupancy. Toys in yards, wind chimes, mailboxes with dents. The rental had no yard furniture, no trash bins visible, no personal marks. It looked paused. Inside, the air smelled clean, but in use like dust wiped down with lemon cleaner. The floors were bare. Footsteps echoed more than expected. Light switches worked, but felt loose. Cabinets opened without resistance. The refrigerator was empty except for a box of baking soda. The freezer held nothing. The closets were empty of clothing. Hangers lined up evenly. I noted the absence of anything soft. No rugs, no towels except two folded on the bathroom counter. No couch throws, no extra pillows. Every clock in the house was stopped. The oven display blinked a different time than a microwave. The wall clock in the hallway was frozen mid-minute. A small digital clock on the bedside table showed a third time entirely. I assumed neglect. The batteries had likely been left to die at different points. I did not reset them. I did not want to create noise. I set up my laptop at the dining table and worked until night. The neighborhood quieted early. Porch lights clicked on and off. Cars passed without stopping. The house made settling sounds. Pipes shifted. The old wood creaked. Nothing stood out. I locked the doors and checked the security panel near the kitchen. The system was active. A keypad with worn numbers. No camera feed history before my arrival. The screen showed nothing archived. I assumed the owner had reset it between guests. I armed it and went to bed. The bedroom faced the hallway. The door stayed open for airflow. I fell asleep late. Sometime around 2:30 a.m., I woke to a sound that did not belong to the house. It was not a step. It was not a pipe. It was slow and deliberate. The sound of someone running a fingernail along the hallway wall. It moved at a steady pace, dragging softly across painted drywall. The pressure changed slightly as it passed over nail heads beneath the surface. The rhythm suggested intention. The sound stopped near the bedroom door. I stayed still. My breathing slowed without effort. The sound did not resume. Minutes passed. The house returned to silence. I told myself it could have been air shifting a loose object. I told myself the wall texture might catch sound. I told myself the brain fills gaps when half awake. In the morning, I checked the hallway wall. No marks. The paint was intact. I checked the doors and windows. All locked. The alarm history showed no activity overnight. I worked all day with the bedroom door closed. That night, I armed the system again. I placed a chair against the bedroom door without blocking it fully. I slept lighter. I woke to a series of faint tones coming from the kitchen. The alarm system was disarming itself. The keypad made a soft confirmation sound after each entry. The sequence was slow and precise. No hositashchen, no mistakes, key by key. I did not move. The tone stopped. The system showed inactive. I waited. No further sounds followed. No steps. No doors. No running water. The house held still. Morning light came through the blinds. I checked the panel. The disarm time matched the night. I checked the logs. It showed a valid code entry. I did not know the code. I had not set a new one. I searched the house. The guest room closet door was closed. The floor beneath, it showed muddy footprints leading from the hallway. The prints were partial, as if someone had wiped their feet poorly. They stopped at the closet door. They faced inward. I opened the door slowly. Inside, the closet was empty except for a faint smell of damp soil. The carpet inside was compressed, as if someone had stood there recently. The back wall panel did not sit flush. I pressed it. It flexed. Behind it was a shallow crawl space running between walls. The opening was just wide enough for a person. The space smelled like earth and old insulation. There were drag marks on the wood. The space led toward the master bedroom wall. I checked the master bedroom closet. The back panel that was also loose. The crawl space connected the two. A narrow route between rooms. I checked the clocks again. Each stop time corresponded to a point in the night. One near midnight. One near the fingernail sound. One near the alarm disarm. They were markers. The realization settled without panic. The owner did not live out of town. He lived inside the house. Not always, but enough to know its rhythms. Enough to know the keypad by touch. The war numbers matched the code sequence. Enough to move through walls without being seen. The fingernail sound was not a test. It was orientation. The alarm disarm was not a mistake. It was routine. I packed my things without rushing. I did not rearm the system. I left the house as I found it. I locked the door. I drove to a police station and reported an unlawful occupancy. I provided photos of the crawl space, the footprints, the alarm logs. An investigation followed. The owner was found later that week. He had modified the house years earlier after a divorce. He rented it intermittently for income while returning between guests. He believed he was unseen. He believed he was careful. The case ended with charges. The house was condemned temporarily for code violations. The clocks were logged as evidence. The system history confirmed access patterns. I finished my project at home. I no longer rent empty houses. I notice walls more now. I notice silence. I do not ignore stop clocks. I was alone that night by choice. My partner was out of town, the neighbors were away, and the street was quiet in a way that only happens midweek after a storm. I had planned to sleep early. The house felt bigger without anyone else moving through it. Every room held still air. The only sound came from the refrigerator cycling on and off and the soft ticking from the clock in the kitchen. I locked the doors out of habit, even though the neighborhood had never given me a reason to worry. I checked the windows once, then again before bed. The blinds were closed. The porch light stayed on. I turned off the living room lamp and went upstairs. The bedroom felt colder than usual. The heat had kicked on earlier, but the temperature dropped fast once the house settled. I lay on my back and listened to the wind brush against the siding. Tree branches scraped the roof in slow passes. The sound was steady and easy to explain. I focused on it until my breathing slowed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up for no clear reason. The room was dark enough that I could not see the far wall. My eyes adjusted in small steps. The clock glowed faint red. It was just after 1. The house was quiet again, deeper than before, like everything had paused. I lay still, waiting for sleep to return. That was when I noticed the smell. It was faint, almost gone, like damp fabric and old leaves. It did not belong in the room. I had cleaned earlier that day. The windows were shut. The smell felt close, as if it had followed me upstairs. I sat up and listened. Nothing moved. No steps, no voices, no sound from outside. The smell faded when I shifted. I told myself it came from the vents, from the basement, from something stirred by the heat. I tried to sleep again. A soft sound came from downstairs. It was not loud enough to wake me on its own. It sounded like pressure on wood, then release. The stairs were old. They made noise when stepped on. This was different. It was slower and came from the kitchen side of the house. I stayed in bed longer than I should have. My body felt heavy, pinned by the dark. I counted the seconds between sounds. Another came, then another, spaced out and careful. The refrigerator should have been running. It was silent. I reached for my phone and checked the time. It was 1:17. No notifications. No missed calls. The signal was fine. I muted the screen and held the phone against my chest. The smell returned, stronger now, mixed with something metallic. I slid my feet onto the floor. The wood was cold. I moved to the door and pressed my ear against it. The sound stopped. The house held its breath. I waited. Nothing followed. I opened the door a crack and looked into the hall. The night light near the stairs cast a thin line along the wall. The rest was shadow. I stepped out and closed the door behind me without a sound. Each step felt loud in my head. I paused at the top of the stairs and listened again. From below, I heard a soft shuffle. It came from the kitchen near the back door. The sound had weight. It was not an animal. It was not the house. It moved with intent, then stopped. I went back into the bedroom and locked the door. The lock felt small in my hand. I pressed a chair under the handle and sat on the bed. My heart beat hard enough to make my vision pulse. I tried to slow my breathing. The smell crept under the door. Minutes passed without sound. I checked the time again. It was 1:29. I considered calling for help, but the thought of making noise froze me. The idea that someone would hear it from inside the house felt worse than being alone with it. A faint click came from the hallway. It sounded like the floor settling, but it came too close to the door. Another followed, then the soft brush of fabric against wood. The chair trembled once, just enough to notice. The handle did not move. The lock held. I pressed my hand over my mouth and leaned back. My breath sounded loud to me. I forced myself to breathe shallow and slow. The sound shifted away from the door. Steps moved down the hall, careful and uneven, like someone avoiding creaks they knew too well. The smell lingered, then thinned. I listened until my ears hurt. I did not move until the light outside the window began to change. The gray of early morning crept in. Birds started up in short bursts. The house woke around me, pipes ticking as the heat came back on. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hall. The chair had shifted slightly, dragged a few inches across the floor. The carpet fibers were pressed down near the door, as if someone had stood there for a while. Downstairs, the back door was unlocked. I had locked it before bed. The deadbolt was turned, but not fully. The door itself was shut. Mud streaked the floor near the mat. They led toward the kitchen sink, then stopped. A cabinet door hung open. Inside, a loaf of bread was gone. A drawer beneath it had been pulled out just enough to catch on the frame. The refrigerator hummed when I opened it. Everything inside looked untouched. On the counter, near the knife block, a single glove lay folded. It was not mine. The fabric was thin and damp. I checked the rest of the house with my phone in my hand. Nothing else was missing. No broken windows. No force locks. The basement door was closed, but not latched. At the bottom of the stairs, the smell was strongest. It came from the corner near the crawlspace access. The panel had been moved. Dirt smudged the concrete. When the police arrived later that morning, they found signs of someone living beneath the house. Blankets, food wrappers, a flashlight with dead batteries. The person had entered through a loose vent at the back, crawling up when the house went dark and quiet. They had learned the sounds, the timing, the way the floor carried weight. They had left when the light returned. The officer explained it all in plain terms. Someone looking for warmth. Someone who thought the house was empty. Someone who stayed longer than they should have, because no one stopped them. After they left, I sat on the stairs and looked at the marks on the floor, the shifted chair, the glove on the counter sealed in a bag. The house felt changed, not damaged but known. Every sound now had a memory tied to it. I did not sleep there again. The vent was fixed. The locks were replaced. Lights were added where shadows had been. The house became safe again in a way that could be measured. Still, some nights when the air is still and the heat cycles off, I remember how the sounds matched the silence, how close someone had been while I lay awake, counting time by my own breath. We stayed at my cousin's place because it was easier than renting somewhere short-term. He was overseas for work and asked us to keep the house lived in. It sat on the edge of town where new developments stopped and trees took over. One floor, wide windows, cedar siding that had faded unevenly. The yard sloped down into brush thick enough to swallow fallen branches. At night, the place felt cut off even though there were neighbors a few streets over. The first night felt normal. We unpacked groceries, turned on lights, and locked the doors out of habit. The house had a calm layout. Everything visible from the living room. No long hallways. No corners that hid sound. I slept lightly because the bed was not mine, but nothing woke me. In the morning, food was missing. Not wrappers left out or crumbs on the counter. Actual items gone. Bread that had been sealed. Cold cuts still in their plastic. A container of leftover pasta that had been pushed to the back of the fridge. The fridge door had been closed. The lock on the back door was still engaged. Windows were shut. We assumed a mistake. Maybe we brought less than we thought. Maybe one of us ate and forgot. It did not feel urgent. Houses sometimes confuse people at first. The second night, the fridge was unplugged. The cord lay on the floor, as if someone had pulled it straight out. Everything inside had warmed. Milk smelled off. Condensation pooled under the drawers. The outlet showed no damage. The plug was not loose. It took force to pull it free. We walked the perimeter in daylight. No broken glass. No marks on the locks. The shed door was closed. The crawl space vent was intact. The windows did not show pry marks. We assumed someone had a key. A neighbor. A cleaner. A relative who had not been told. The idea felt thin, but it was better than the alternative. We changed our routine. Light stayed on at night. We moved anything important into one room. We checked locks twice. We slept close enough to hear each other move. On the third night, it happened late. The house had gone quiet the way it does when air stops moving. I was awake and listening because sleep felt like a mistake. The sound came from the sidewall, near the kitchen. A dull impact followed by a scrape. Then another impact higher up. It did not sound like an animal. It sounded like hands. Wet palms slapping siding, then sliding to find purchase. The rhythm was wrong for claws. The spacing was wrong for feet. The sound moved upward in short bursts. Slap. Pause. Scrape. Slap. The siding flexed. Something pressed hard enough to bow it inward. The wall creaked where nails took strain. The movement reached window height and stopped. We did not open the door. We did not turn off the lights. We stood still and listened. The sound did not circle the house. It stayed there, close to the glass. Breathing reached us through the pane, faint but steady, as if someone had leaned in and waited. Nothing else happened that night. No handle tested. No knock. No attempt to enter. The waiting felt deliberate. In the morning, we saw the damage. The siding was bent inward in several places, shoulder height and above. The dents matched the shape of a body pressing hard, then shifting weight. There were no footprints in the dirt beneath. The ground there was soft from recent rain. It should have held prints. It did not. We searched again. No sign of entry. The windows were unmarked. The screens were intact. The doors still latched. The yard showed nothing dragged, nothing dropped. We slept in shifts after that. One of us stayed awake while the other rested. The awake hours stretched. Every small sound sharpened. The house settled and popped as it cooled. The refrigerator hummed after we plugged it back in. Pipes ticked. Outside, the trees moved and stopped. Whatever had climbed the house did not try the door again. It came back each night and waited near the windows. We saw the shape sometimes in reflected light. A shoulder, an arm lifting and resting against glass. A head that stayed just out of full view. The waiting never turned into action. It felt like testing, like learning. On the fifth day, we found more missing food. Items that required hands to open. Jars unscrewed and left empty in the trash outside the fence. The lids had been replaced loosely, as if to delay notice. The trash can lid had been lifted without tipping the bin. We noticed a path in the brush that had not been there before. Bent stems, leaves rubbed dull. The path led toward the back of the property where the fence sagged. Beyond it lay a strip of unmanaged land with old concrete slabs half buried and rebar sticking out like bones. It looked like the remains of a project that stopped and was forgotten. We called for help. The response came slow. By the time anyone arrived, the place looked calm. No one saw the waiting figure. The dents in the siding were photographed. The missing food noted. The lack of footprints written down. We were told to secure the house and leave if we felt unsafe. We chose to leave. Before we did, we found the explanation. It came from the crawl space access hidden behind a removable panel in the laundry room. The panel had been loosened and set back in place. Inside, the earth showed signs of use. Flattened soil. A piece of cardboard laid down as a mat. A battery-powered lamp taped to a joist. Food wrappers tucked into a corner. A change of clothes folded with care. There was a ladder leaned against the foundation outside, hidden by brush, made from scrap wood and roofing nails. It left no prints because it never touched the ground where we looked. It rested on concrete blocks buried just enough to hold weight. The climb used hands on siding because the ladder stopped short, forcing a reach that left marks at shoulder height. The waiting at windows made sense then. It was observation, counting, learning where people slept, learning who woke and when. The person had used the house as a source, not a target. Food, power, warmth. The unplugged fridge slowed spoilage, so items could be taken later without smell. The missing food followed patterns of our absence. The waiting never turned into entry because entry was not needed. The crawl space gave access to warmth and a place to listen. The ladder gave height without leaving tracks. We secured the panel, blocked the crawl space vents, and removed the ladder. We left that afternoon and told my cousin everything. He arranged for repairs and security before returning. The house sold months later. The new owners replaced the siding and sealed the foundation. The land behind was cleared. No more paths formed. I still think about the waiting. Not the climbing or the missing food, but the patience. The way it chose not to enter when doors stood between us. The way it learned the house without claiming it. That part felt deliberate, controlled, and real. I stayed because the house belonged to my uncle, and he trusted me with it while he worked out of state. It was December 2011, and the timing worked for both of us. I needed a place to stay between short-term jobs, and he needed someone to keep an eye on the property through winter. The house sat outside a small town in upstate New York, surrounded by bare trees and old stone walls that marked property lines from another century. Snow came early that year and stayed. The road leading to the house was plowed, but everything beyond it felt locked in place by cold. The house itself was older than it looked. It had been renovated in stages, each owner adding something without removing what came before. You could feel that history in a way the floors sloped and the walls failed to meet at clean angles. Heat came from oil, loud and uneven, clicking through pipes that ran exposed along the basement ceiling. During the day, the place felt manageable. At night, it felt occupied by the sounds of its own structure. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, stone foundation, exposed beams. My uncle kept tools down there, old furniture, boxes of books that smelled like paper and dust. One wall held metal shelving stacked with paint cans, jars of screws, and folded tarps. Behind that shelving was the second door. I noticed it on my second day while reorganizing. The shelf had been pushed tight to the wall, flush enough that I assumed it was just part of the foundation. When I shifted one shelf to reach a box behind it, I saw the outline of a door set into the concrete. It was old, made of thick wood reinforced with metal bands. There was no handle or latch on my side, just a flat surface and hinges sunk deep into the frame. I assumed it led to a filled-in stairwell or an old coal chute sealed decades earlier. Houses like this often had sealed features left in place because removing them cost more than ignoring them. I pushed the shelving back and forgot about it. The first night I heard the sound, I was half asleep on the couch upstairs. The heat had shut off and the house cooled fast. Somewhere below me came a dull pressure, not loud enough to register as a bang. It felt more like a shift, a slow stress on wood. I told myself it was the foundation settling in the cold. Old houses made those noises. The second night, it happened again, later, closer to midnight. This time I was awake, reading. The sound came from the basement, low and steady. Something pressed, held, then released. Not pounding, leaning, testing. The sound carried through the floor in a way that made my stomach tighten. I went down with a flashlight. The basement felt colder than before, the air sharp and metallic. Everything looked the same. No movement, no luces. I stood near the shelving and listened. Nothing followed. I went back upstairs and locked the basement door at the top of the stairs, more out of habit than fear. Over the next few nights, the sound repeated. Always after dark. Always slow. The pressure lasted longer each time. I began checking the door behind the shelving every morning. At first, it looked unchanged. By the fourth day, I noticed the slightest curve along its center, as if something had pressed against it hard enough to make the wood give. The metal bands held it in place, but the door no longer sat flat. The smell started around then. Cold metal, sharp and dry, mixed with something animal. Not rot, not waste, just the scent of a body that had been somewhere damp and enclosed. The smell stayed close to the door. When I moved the shelving away, it grew stronger. When I pushed the shelving back, it lingered. I tried to convince myself there was a rational explanation. Pressure changes, trapped air, an old structure responding to temperature swings. Still, I started leaving lights on at night. I avoided the basement unless I needed something. By the end of the week, The door had bowed enough to be obvious. The wood creaked faintly even during the day, as if it were under constant strain. The smell thickened. I cleaned the basement floor. I checked the foundation for cracks. I found nothing that explained it. On my last night in the house, I packed my things upstairs and planned to leave early the next morning. Snow fell steadily outside, softening the world into silence. I lay in bed fully dressed, listening to the heat cycle on and off. Just after midnight, the sound came again. This time it didn't stop. The pressure against the door stayed constant. The wood groaned in small increments, fibers adjusting under weight. Then I heard breathing. Slow, deep, controlled. It came through the wall and up the stairs, steady enough to match my own pulse if I let it. I didn't go down there. I stayed still until the sound faded, not all at once, but gradually, like someone easing back after testing a limit. When morning came, I didn't hesitate. I carried my bags to the car, started the engine, and let it warm while I went back inside one last time. I went to the basement. The air felt disturbed, warmer near the shelving. I moved it aside and looked at the door. The bow was worse. The hinges were strained, screws pulled slightly from the frame. I locked the main basement door at the top of the stairs, slid the shelving back, and left. I reported everything to my uncle later, sticking to facts. He didn't argue. He hired someone to check the basement. They found signs of a hidden crawl space beyond where the door had been. Old tunnels dug decades earlier for storage, sealed off poorly and forgotten. Evidence showed that someone had been using it as shelter, entering from the woods through a collapsed access point and moving inside during storms. The door had been the last barrier. By the time anyone went back, the second door was gone, removed from the other side. The frame splintered inward, the wood dragged away into the dark space beyond. Whoever had been there left before they were trapped again. The house was boarded up after that. My uncle sold it the following spring. I never went back. The house had been empty for over a year when I moved in. It sat at the end of a short street where every other place had lights on at night and cars coming and going. This one stayed dark. The owner wanted it renovated and sold. I had experience with demolition work and needed somewhere cheap to stay. Living on site saved money and time. I told myself the emptiness was an advantage. The front door stuck when opened, swollen from moisture. Inside, the air felt sealed, stale but not rotten. Dust lay flat across the floors, not disturbed by footprints. The windows were intact and locked. The power worked. The water worked. The house felt paused rather than abandoned. I set up a mattress in what used to be the dining room because it had the clearest view of the front and back doors. I kept my tools in the garage. During the day, I stripped drywall and pulled cabinets. At night, I ate simple food and slept early. The house settled around me with quiet pops and creaks. I expected that. On the third day, I started removing drywall in a hallway near the kitchen. The plan showed nothing unusual behind it. When the last section came free, I saw a dark opening that should not have been there. A crawl space ran behind the walls, wider than standard, tall enough for someone to move through on hands and knees. The framing was older than the rest of the house. It looked intentional. I climbed inside with a flashlight. The beam caught blankets folded against the wall. Empty cans were stacked neatly. There was a shallow depression in the insulation shaped like a body. It was not old. The fibers were compressed and clean of dust. Someone had been sleeping there recently. I backed out and stood in the hallway for a long time. The house felt different once I knew. Not louder, not darker, just occupied in a way I could not see. I searched the rest of the crawl space access points. There were more gaps hidden behind cabinets and inside closets, all connected, none marked on the plans. The space ran above the basement ceiling and through the vents. That night, I slept light. Sometime after midnight, I heard movement through the vents. It was not scratching. It was a shift of weight, slow and careful. The sound paused often like someone listening. Animals move without restraint. This movement held back. It stopped when I held my breath. It resumed when I shifted slightly. It never reached the room I slept in. The next day, I considered leaving. I also considered the cost of doing so. I locked the exterior doors and blocked the crawl space opening with plywood screwed into the studs. I told myself that would end it. The movement returned the next night. It came from above this time. The vents carried the sound of someone crawling, distributing weight evenly, avoiding loose metal. I followed the sound with my eyes, even though there was nothing to see. It moved toward the bathroom. I slept during the day after that. At night, I stayed awake with the lights on. The movement stopped entirely when the house stayed lit. On the fifth night, I turned off the lights and lay still. I needed to know where it led. The sound returned after an hour. It traveled the vent line toward the kitchen. I heard a soft thump as someone exited into a wall space. Then I heard water. The sink downstairs ran briefly, then stopped. It started again, slower this time. The sound was controlled, like someone limiting pressure. They knew how loud it could be. They shut off gently. I waited. I moved quietly to the stairs. The kitchen light was off. The sink was dry. No drops in the basin. No moisture on the counter. The mirror above it was fog from the inside, like someone had stood close and breathed against it. I understood then how long the house had been used. The emptiness was a cover. The year without residents had been an opportunity. I did not confront anything. I packed only what I needed. I left the tools. I unlocked the doors. I drove to a place with lights and people and stayed awake until morning. I reported the findings to the owner and local authorities. An inspection followed. They found multiple access points cut into the vent system. They found food caches sealed in plastic. They found a ladder hidden behind insulation leading to the attic. They found signs of long-term use. The person was not found, but the explanation was clear. Someone had lived inside the structure, moving through it with care, using it when it was safe, hiding when it was not. The fog mirror was body heat. The dry sink was practice. The house was sealed and condemned until repairs could be done. I took another job. I stopped staying on sites overnight. I still hear vents sometimes, even in places where nothing should move. I stayed because my friend's house was old and the winter had come early. The pipes had frozen before. The heating system had been patched too many times. She did not trust it when the temperature dropped fast. She asked me to keep the fire going while she traveled for work. I arrived before dusk with food, extra blankets, and a shovel. The house sat alone at the edge of a small stand of trees. The road was plowed but narrow. The yard sloped down toward the back where the porch faced the woods. The power went out the first night. It happened without warning. The lights cut clean and the house went quiet except for the wind. The cold moved in fast. I burned wood in the stove and closed the doors to the rooms I did not need. I slept in layers on the couch at first, then moved to the bedroom when the fire settled into a steady heat. The walls held cold like stone. The floors creaked as they shrank. Snow fell through the night. It was light and dry. I checked the porch once before bed. The yard was smooth and pale. No tracks crossed it. The trees stood dark and tight together, their branches heavy. In the morning, I woke early to keep the fire alive. The house smelled of ash and iron. The cold had pressed in again. I pulled on boots and stepped out back to shake snow from the porch steps. That was when I saw the marks. They started at the tree-line. 2 long grooves ran straight toward the house. They were not spaced like feet. They were wide and uneven, pressed deep into the snow. Bits of bark and needles were scattered along them. At the edge of the porch, the marks ended in a wide smear. The boards were scuffed, and a thin line of dark matter had dried near the steps. It looked like something heavy had been dragged. The snow around it was clean. No footprints stood near the marks, only the smooth fall of the night. I stood there longer than I should have. The air was sharp in my lungs. The woods were quiet. No birds moved. I took pictures with my phone, then went back inside and locked the door. I checked the other doors and the windows. Everything was closed. The crawlspace vents were covered with wire, old but intact. The day passed slow. The power stayed out. I fed the stove and watched the temperature drop when the fire thinned. I shoveled the front walk and the path to the road. No other marks showed in the snow. The drag lines at the back stayed clear in the cold. I kept looking at them through the kitchen window. That night, the wind picked up. It pushed snow against the house in soft waves. I went to bed early. I lay still, listening to the house settle. The stove ticked as it cooled. The board above me popped with small sounds. Then I heard scratching under the porch. It was slow at first, a dry rasp like nails on old wood. It came in bursts, then paused. I held my breath without meaning to. The scratching stopped. I breathed again. It started again, the same pace as my breath, each scrape timed with my inhale and exhale. When I slowed my breathing, it slowed. When I stopped, it stopped. I stayed still until my chest burned. The sound did not return when I breathed again. I waited for minutes, counted my pulse. Nothing else moved. I did not sleep again. The next day was clear and bright. The cold sharpened everything. I went out back with a flashlight and crouched near the porch. The space under was low and dark. Snow had drifted against the skirting. I saw disturbed snow near one vent. The wire had been bent outward. The screws were loose, backed out just enough to make a gap. Inside the gap, the dirt was packed smooth. Something had been there. I replaced the screws with longer ones from a jar in the mudroom. I packed snow tight against the skirting. I dragged a heavy planter over the spot. I checked the other vents and found another with the wire pulled down. I fixed that one too. That night, I slept in the bedroom with the door closed. I stacked a chair against it. The scratching returned, faint and careful, closer than before. It came from a space beneath the floor. It matched my breath again. I pressed a pillow over my face and breathed through my nose. The sound followed until I forced myself to breathe in short, uneven pulls. It paused. I lay awake until dawn. The power came back late the third afternoon. The house hummed as it woke. The heat kicked on with a dry smell. I turned off the stove and cleaned the ash. I felt foolish for the relief that washed over me. I checked the alarm panel by the door. It showed a log of events from the nights the power was out. Motion detected, it read. Every night between 3 o'clock and 3:12 a.m. The location listed was the hall, just outside the bedroom door. I stood there with my coat on, staring at the screen. The hall had no windows. The sensor faced the door. It tripped on heat and movement. The timestamps were exact. I walked the house room by room. I found a back door unlocked. I had locked it. The deadbolt showed a faint mark, a crescent of metal rubbed raw. I checked the basement door. It opened onto the crawl space access. The padlock hung loose. The hasp was bent. In the crawl space, the dirt was tracked smooth in a narrow path from the back vents to a hole cut through the floor near the pantry. The cut was rough and old, hidden behind a shelf. A board had been loosened enough to lift. On the floor above, the pantry mat was shifted, then placed back. The firewood stack by the stove was lower. A pair of gloves I did not own lay folded behind the water heater. The drag marks made sense then. A deer had died in the woods. Someone had pulled it close, butchered on the porch where the light spilled out, then taken the meat under the house to keep it from freezing hard. The dark smear on the steps matched dry blood. The scratching matched the careful work of hands against wood, stopping when the house went still, starting again when it felt safe. The breathing sync came from sound and vibration through the boards. When I stopped, the house went quiet enough to listen. The motion alerts lined up with the heater cycle. The hall warmed when the system kicked on, tripping the sensor when a body moved past the bedroom door, close enough to feel the heat, but not close enough to be seen. The unlocked door and the bent hasp told me to rest. I packed my things without sitting down. I called the police from the car and waited at the end of the drive with the engine running. They searched the house and the crawl space. They found a man sleeping deep under the porch, wrapped in plastic and old insulation, using the warmth that bled through the floor. He had been living in the woods for weeks, moving between empty places. He had watched the house before I arrived. He knew the nights. He knew the sounds. I did not go back inside after that. When my friend returned, she fixed the vents and sealed the crawl space. She installed lights and new locks. She replaced the alarm. The drag marks melted with the next snow. The porch boards kept their scars. I still think about the way the scratching matched my breath, and how close he had been while I lay awake, counting time by the sound of my own lungs. I took the job because it sounded easy. Overnight house, sitting while the parents were out of town. No kids, no pets, no chores beyond staying inside and keeping lights on. They said the kids were already at their grandparents' place and would not be back until after the parents returned. The reason they gave for needing someone, there was insurance. An occupied house lowered risk. I had done similar jobs before and never questioned that part. The house sat at the edge of a newer development where the lots grew larger the farther you drove from the main road. This one backed into a strip of undeveloped land with tall grass and thin trees. The driveway curved long and slow, ending at a 3-car garage that stayed closed when I arrived. I parked near the front and carried my bag up wide stone steps that held heat from the day. The air smelled dry outside, but when I unlocked the door and stepped in, the smell changed. It was faint but clear, iron and old carpet, like a basement that had been closed too long. The entryway opened into a high ceiling with a staircase that split halfway up and curved to either side. The lights were already on, not all of them, but enough to show every corner without shadows. The parents had left instructions printed on a single sheet on the kitchen counter. Stay downstairs. Lock the doors at 10. Do not go upstairs unless there was an emergency. Use the baby monitor if there are noises. Call if something urgent came up. They listed both their numbers and the address of the grandparents' house. The monitors sat on the kitchen island, already plugged in. A small screen, black and white, angled toward the ceiling. The sound was turned down low. I assumed they used it when the kids were home and never bothered unplugging it. That detail stayed with me more than the rules. I walked the ground floor first. Living room, dining area, kitchen, small office near the stairs, bathroom near the back door. Everything clean, but not new. The carpet had darkened paths where feet traveled often. The furniture was heavy and older than the house itself. Family photos lined the walls, most of them taken years ago. The kids looked younger than I expected, which made sense if they were staying elsewhere. Upstairs was off limits, so I did not climb the stairs. I stood at the base and looked up long enough to feel the quiet press against my ears, then turned away. I locked the doors earlier than 10. The house felt sealed once I did. No outside noise made it through the walls. Even the air conditioner cycled softly, like it was trying not to be noticed. I ate food I brought and watched television at low volume. I kept the lights on in every downstairs room the way they asked. The iron smell faded after a while, or maybe I stopped noticing it. Around midnight, the monitor crackled. The sound was sharp and sudden. I looked over and saw a static ripple across the screen. The audio jumped, then settled into something steady. Breathing, slow and uneven, close enough that it sounded wet, like air moving through a narrow space. I leaned closer to the monitor, keeping my feet planted. The screen showed a corner of a ceiling and part of a wall. No movement, just a sound. I checked the volume and lowered it, then raised it again to be sure it was not interference. The breathing stayed the same. I reminded myself that electronics pick up noise. Old wiring, nearby signals. The house was large. Sound traveled. I turned the monitor off. The breathing cut out immediately. I sat back on the couch and waited. I did not feel scared yet, more alert than anything. My body felt ready, like before a test or a long drive at night. I watched the television without following the plot. I kept noticing how the house held still around me. No settling sounds, no pipes knocking. The quiet felt deliberate. At 1:17 in the morning, the monitor turned itself back on. The screen lit up before the sound returned. This time it was not breathing. It was footsteps, slow pacing, back and forth. The sound was dull, like bare feet on carpet. The steps stayed within a small area. They never approached the stairs. The screen showed the same empty ceiling. I did not move. The instructions said to stay downstairs. I believed them more than I trusted my own instincts. I watched the monitor and counted steps. After a while, the pacing stopped. I turned the volume down until it was barely audible and waited again. At 2, my phone vibrated. A text from one of the parents. It asked if he had settled yet. No names, no context, just that. My chest tightened in a way that felt physical, like pressure from a seatbelt pulled too fast. I did not respond. I stared at the phone screen until it went dark again. The monitor stayed on. No sound came through after that. I stayed awake until the light outside shifted from black to gray. The house did not change with it. When morning came fully, I unlocked the doors and walked the ground floor one more time. Everything was as I left it. I stood at the bottom of the stairs longer than before. The rule about staying downstairs had been for the night. Daylight changed things. I went up slowly, keeping one hand on the rail. The carpet absorbed the sound of my steps. At the top, the hallway stretched longer than I expected, lined with doors on both sides. Every door stood open. Bedrooms, bathrooms, closets. The air up there carried the iron smell stronger than before. The rooms looked lived in, but untouched. Beds made, toys arranged, no signs of disturbance. The windows in every room were shut and locked. I checked each one by hand. The locks all faced inward. None showed damage. No screens were bent or cut. In the far bedroom, the one at the end of the hall, the baby monitor camera sat on a dresser aimed at the ceiling corner I had seen on the screen. The power cord ran down the wall and into an outlet. The camera lens held a faint smear, like a fingerprint wiped poorly. I left the house after that and did not wait for the parents to return. I sent a message saying I was done and the house was secure. They replied hours later with a short confirmation and payment sent electronically. I did not ask questions. A week passed before I looked them up. Curiosity pushed past caution. The address had a history. The house had been listed for sale once and pulled quickly. A local news article came up from years earlier. An adult male relative had lived with the family briefly after a medical discharge. He had cognitive issues from head injury. He wandered at night. He fixated on routine. Insurance documents mentioned supervision requirements and safety accommodations. The article said he no longer lived there. The insurance reason made sense after that. Occupancy requirements. Liability. What did not make sense was the message asking if he had settled yet. The locks on the windows. The instructions to stay downstairs. I realized then that I had never checked the garage. The door inside the house had stayed shut the entire night. I had assumed the cars were gone. I drove by once weeks later. The garage door was open. The space was empty except for a narrow mattress against the back wall and a portable heater plugged in near the floor. I understood the job then. I had not been hired to watch a house. I had been hired to make it look watched. Someone else had been there the entire time, kept out of sight by routine and rules meant for me as much as for him. The monitor had not malfunctioned. It had done exactly what it was meant to do. I did not take overnight jobs after that. I stopped answering messages that mention insurance as a reason. I learned how easily quiet can be managed, how rules can replace locks, and how presence does not always mean protection. The house had never been empty. I had just been the only one who did not belong there. I went to my sister's house because I did not want it empty. The funeral ended, people left town, and the realtor said it would take weeks to sell. I told myself an occupied house stayed normal. Lights on, water running, a car in the driveway. Empty houses change. I believe that. The house sat on a quiet street with tired lawns and mailboxes that leaned. It had been built in the early 70s and then expanded sometime in the 90s when people added space without fixing what already sagged. The addition sat off the back like an afterthought. The roofline dipped. The siding did not match. Inside, the floors tilted enough that a coin would roll on its own. Doors rubbed the frame and never latched right. My sister used the added bedroom as storage and slept in the original room at the front. I stayed because it felt like the right thing. I slept on the couch the first night because my friend Mark came along and said it would be easier. He left before dawn without waking me. I noticed the front door unlocked when I got up. His car was gone. I assumed he had an early shift and did not want to bother me. Later that day, he sent a message saying he could not stay again. He said it was nothing. He said he was fine. He did not explain. I began my routine. I cleaned the kitchen and ran the dishwasher once a day to keep the pipes moving. I checked the basement for leaks. I opened windows for air, even though the screen stuck. I slept in the front bedroom because it felt right to use my sister's room. The bed still smelled faintly like her detergent. The closet still held coats. I did not move. At night, the house made normal sounds. Pipes ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Wind brushed the gutters. The addition made its own noise. It always had. My sister used to complain about it. There were sounds inside the walls that were heavier than mice and slower than raccoons. They did not scurry. They shifted. They pressed. The timing mattered. The sounds happened late and stopped when I stood still. They returned when I laid down. I checked the outside. No broken vents. No torn screens. I put a flashlight against the siding and looked for gaps. The addition sat on a shallow crawl space with vents half buried by soil. The mesh was rusted. One vent had been pushed inward, then bent back into place. It looked old. It looked like weather had done it. The second night alone, I tried the added bedroom because it had better air. I felt wrong there. The floor dipped near the wall. The door scraped. When I turned off the lamp, the dark felt closer than it should. The sound came earlier. Something shifted behind the drywall, near the ceiling, and then paused. The pause lasted long enough that my breathing felt loud. I moved to the living room and slept on the couch again. The sounds faded. On the third night, I used the bathroom in the hall after midnight. The mirror fogged because the fan barely worked. When I wiped it with a towel, I saw handprints on the inside of the glass. They were smeared as if someone had leaned close and breathed on the mirror. The prints were wide. The fingers were spaced wrong. The thumbs sat too far from the palm. They were not mine. They were not my sister's. They were higher than my shoulders. I cleaned the mirror until the streaks were gone. I washed my hands even though they felt clean. I checked the lock. It turned all the way. The fan rattled. The light flickered once and steadied. I did not sleep in the bedroom again. I stayed in the living room. The house felt easier there. The air moved. The sound stayed distant. The addition remained quiet, like a held breath. I began to pay attention to patterns. The noises tracked my location. When I moved toward the back of the house, they followed along the wall. When I stayed near the front, they stayed in the back. The house felt relieved when I stayed away from the addition. That word came to me without effort. Relieved, as if pressure had eased. On the fourth day, I found a loose register in the attic room. The screws were stripped. The duct behind it did not line up with the opening. There was space around it where drywall crumbled into dust. I smelled old sweat and soil. The smell reminded me of the backpack Mark once carried after a camping trip that ended badly. I put the register back and pressed until it sat flat. It did not sit flat. I called the realtor to ask about inspections. The records showed a permit for the addition, but no final sign-off. The crawl space had never been sealed right. The vents were original. The ductwork had been rerouted and left gaps. Nothing illegal. Nothing fixed. That night, the sounds came even though I stayed in the living room. They moved with purpose. They traced the path of the duct. They stopped beneath the bathroom. The mirrors stayed clear. I slept in short stretches. In the morning, I found dirt on the floor near the back door. The pattern looked dragged, not tracked. The door itself was locked. The deadbolt had a scratch near the strike plate. It could have been old. It did not feel old. I went outside and circled the house. The vent that had looked bent before now sat loose. The mesh pushed inward. I pulled it free with my fingers. The opening led into the crawl space under the addition. The smell rose stronger. The dirt beneath showed a smooth path worn into it. I did not go in. I called for a general inspector and scheduled a visit for the afternoon. I stayed in the living room and kept the front door locked. The sound stayed quiet. The house felt tight. The inspector arrived and crawled under the addition with a light. He came out pale and brushed soil from his shirt. He said there was a man living under there. He said the man had built a nest of insulation and trash. He said there were cans, food wrappers, and a battery lamp. He said the duct had been cut to allow air. He said the man had used the bathroom at night through the wall behind the mirror where the drywall had been thinned and patched badly from the 90s remodel. He said the handprints matched gloves with whitened palms, the kind used for concrete work. He said the man had moved through the walls by opening old chases and pushing through weak spots. He said the man left before dawn most days and returned late. He said he probably listened and learned. The police came later and searched the crawl space and the yard. They found more trash beyond the fence where the ground dipped. They found footprints that matched the drag dirt. They did not find a man. They said this happened more than people thought, especially in houses with bad additions and quiet owners. They said he would move on. Mark finally explained by sending a photo he took that first night. It showed the register on the added room floor lifted just enough to reveal darkness beneath. A pale shape pressed up from below, flattening against the opening, then pulling away. Mark left without waking me because he did not want to make noise. I stayed 2 more days to finish arrangements. I sealed the vent with metal and screws. I blocked the duct opening with sheet metal and foam. I slept in the living room until the locks were changed and the house listed. The sounds did not return. When I left for the last time, I turned off the lights and stood in the front room. The house felt neutral. Not relieved, not tense, just still. I locked the door and drove away knowing exactly what had been there and why it had wanted me anywhere but the bedroom. I was staying at my aunt's house for a few days while she was out of town. She lived in a quiet neighborhood, older homes lined along narrow streets with trees that leaned over the pavement. The place was small, nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable. The backyard had a chain link fence that enclosed a patch of grass. I liked the house. It was simple, predictable. I had stayed before when visiting for holidays, but this time it was different. This time I was alone. The first night, I unpacked my things and settled in. I brought a laptop and some papers, planning to catch up on work while she was gone. The house was quiet except for the usual settling sounds. Floorboards contracting, the old pipes moving. Everything was normal. But then I heard it. It started softly, a low shuffle coming from the backyard. I paused, listening. It wasn't like the wind against the fence or a stray cat moving through the shrubs. It was deliberate, slow, a paw against the grass, soft but measured. I thought it might be a neighbor's dog, but the sound didn't stop. It circled, sometimes closer to the fence, sometimes moving away. I pressed my ear to the window and watched the yard through the blinds. Nothing moved, nothing ran, nothing leapt. I went to check in the kitchen, and the sound stopped. That's when I noticed something strange. The grass near the back gate was pressed flat like someone or something had been pacing. The prints were dog-sized. Not like the neighbor's dog, though. This felt off. I checked the gate. Locked. No one could have come in. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time I dozed, the shuffle returned. I started hearing it inside the house, faintly, almost beneath the floorboards like a vibration. I went through every room, checked the windows, the doors, even the attic access. Everything was secure. Nothing was there. The next day, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was a raccoon, a possum, maybe a loose branch scraping against the fence. I spent the afternoon cleaning and organizing. I opened the blinds in the backyard and looked carefully. I noticed paw prints leading from the corner of the fence toward the house. Shallow at first, then heavier near the back porch. They were wet, not fresh, but recent enough to leave an impression. That evening, I made dinner and turned on music to cover the sounds. The shuffle returned just as I sat down. This time it was accompanied by a low growl, soft at first, then clearer. My stomach sank. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the backyard. No movement. The chain link fence was intact. The gate still locked. But I could feel eyes on me, watching from somewhere just out of sight. I went to bed early, doors locked, lights on, a chair wedged against the back door. I tried to focus on breathing, on slowing my thoughts. Around 2 a.m., I heard again inside the house. A low, deliberate step on the carpet outside my bedroom. Not a human step. Too light, uneven, padded. I sat up and listened. It circled. I could hear it sniffing near the hall, moving toward the stairs, then back the way it came. The air felt heavier. My heart pounded. I waited until the sound stopped, holding my breath, my ears straining. Then it started again, closer this time, near the living room. A soft scratch against the wall. I switched on a flashlight, pointed it at the hallway. Nothing. The beam caught the edge of a shadow that didn't belong to a curtain or furniture. It moved with the light. My chest tightened. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight in hand. Morning came, and I went to the backyard. There were paw prints pressed into the grass again, larger this time. Mud on the porch boards. I examined the prints. The toes were long, nails curved. Not a breed I recognized. Too uniform to be stray. Someone had been keeping a dog here, hidden inside the yard or nearby. That day I called my aunt. She said the house had been empty. She had moved to another state and hadn't left anyone to care for the property. No pets, no neighbors, nothing. My stomach sank. That explained nothing. The third night, I heard it again. The steps outside my bedroom were deliberate, pacing, sniffing. I didn't move. I listened as it stopped near the hall closet, its body weight shifting softly, lightly. Then a bark. Low, controlled, not aggressive, but deliberate. It sounded close, almost inside the room. I could feel the hair on my arms rise. I went to the window slowly. No one. Nothing. The gate was still locked. Then I noticed mud on the bottom of the door frame, smeared like paws had rubbed along the edge. My heart raced. I grabbed a broom and pressed it against the frame. No movement. Silence. I decided to leave immediately. I packed my things in the dark, careful not to make noise. I didn't want to test whether it would follow. Every floorboard seemed louder than before, every settling creak more ominous. I left the back door closed, lights on, and drove away without looking back. The next day, I called the property manager. They inspected the house. They found a hidden dog, small, aggressive, and frightened. It had been kept in the backyard, trained to stay quiet, moving only when no one watched. The person responsible had abandoned it, leaving it locked in the yard. The dog had dug under the fence at times, entering the house without making a sound. The mud, the steps, the sniffing, it all fit. The dog had learned the layout. It had been pacing, observing. The house was cleared, the dog rescued, and the gate reinforced. I never stayed alone in a house again, never ignored subtle noises at night. The memory of padded steps and low growls followed me for months. The feeling of being watched by something clever enough to move unseen, patient, and deliberate. I understood then how easily a living creature could occupy a space without being noticed. How quiet control could turn a normal house into something entirely unpredictable.